series that we've been in. So again, it's the next couple of weeks, and I really just trust that the Lord's uh, made a way in as far as this particular series in your life, and hopefully we've identified some Goliath, different things that we can work through. And remember that I've said a million times throughout this series, and I genuinely mean this, and like I want us to continue to keep this in front of us, is that this is not necessarily an us versus them kind of concept. And I know oftentimes when we think of David and Goliath, we kind of have um, that view or that opinion. But really, what this is a difference between those that know Christ and those that don't. That's really the only difference, right? He makes all the difference. It's not we're better than or anything like that. It's because of the difference that He's made in our life. And so that's kind of been what I've been trying to put before you over the last several weeks, and trying to compare and contrast, if you will, some of the differences that we've seen between those that know Christ and those that don't. And yes, playing on those key players between David, Goliath, and David and Saul. And so one of the things last week, just joking, last week Zach preached, but the week before that was I really wanted to preach a particular message, and I wrestled with it to the extent that I stayed up way later than I typically do, and I ended up preaching a completely different message. And I trust the Lord worked that out. I'll leave that up to Him. I do my best to be obedient to what He's asked me to share or put on my heart to share. And then, of course, He's the one that does the work, which it makes my life much easier, of course. But I trust that He did whatever He wanted to do with that message a couple weeks ago. But this morning, I do want to at least attempt to bring to you the message that I had originally planned to preach to you back then. And as I was kind of reviewing it, thinking about it, praying about it, the Lord definitely changed some of the things. So perhaps that was the reason. But nonetheless, I want to dig into this concept. And I kind of fair warning, what I'm going to be talking about today, and there's time dependent, probably going to be two things we'll talk about. And again, I want to address this idea of being prepared. And I know I've talked about that twice now, but the Lord has just continued to lay this onto my heart, is this idea of being prepared. And so this, and I don't know exactly when this started kind of popping up in my memory, but for the last several weeks for sure, several years ago when I was much smaller, much younger, I was in the Cub Scouts, then went into the Boy Scouts, and they had that motto of being prepared. And I think that's a good motto, to be prepared for things in life. And so I think it's a good idea to like be prepared for an emergency, like so at the Mitchell household in Kentucky. Then here in Virginia, we live in a I guess 1.5 story house, however you want to think about that. But we have the girls' bedrooms are higher than the ground floor, and so we bought those like escape ladder things. And I think part of this was some of the calls I ran as a firefighter and paramedic, but we purchased them because we wanted to have like a plan. And so me being the great dad I was, we purchased them and we put them in the girls' closets, and we never did anything with them. They asked what they were, and then that kind of made me think, hey, we probably ought to talk about this a little bit more in depth. And so we talked about what it was, we got it out, showed them how to use it, those kinds of things. And so if there was a fire, here's kind of the plan. Here's what you do. You don't have to worry about running through the house and screaming and all those kinds of things. You just open your window and go out, which I'm surprised they haven't tried yet, to my knowledge at least. But having that plan, right, a family plan, like this is where we're going to meet, this is what's going to happen. Even in today's world of technology, we've had individuals call, like I've had someone call me and say it was like one of my cousins, and they were hurt, they were in trouble in a different country, they needed money, all this kind of stuff. I'm sure you guys have experienced the same. And so we've come up with like a family safe word, if you will. Like if something's legit and it's really you're really sick, you're really hurt, or something's wrong, right? If you're somewhere and something's wrong, all you got to do is say that word and we're there, right? No questions asked. And so we have like these plans. And again, I don't know if that's part of my background or whatever, but I like the idea of being prepared for emergencies. I like the idea of trying my best to be prepared as well as we can financially for the future. Who knows what that's going to look like. But we kind of put some money aside to try to hopefully, maybe, possibly one of these days retire, things like that. I think, again, being prepared is a good thing. And me, typically, I always have a plan B, right? So especially like when I'm treating a patient, like if this is not going to work, or if I think it could not work, then I always have a plan B. And that kind of comes into education too. Like this is the way I plan on teaching this subject today in class. And if if I'm looking out and some of them are looking at me like you are right now, in that case, then I may kind of change it up a little bit and try a different angle to try to communicate the same concept but differently. So I'm a planner. You guys know that, but I like the idea of being prepared. But I know for a fact, and I'm working through this and trying to breathe through it, I can't be prepared for everything. That drives me nuts. That drives me absolutely crazy sometimes. But I think we should be prepared where we can. But being prepared is more of like a motto to live by. It's not something that should literally consume us. So I do want to, kind of address that there is a balance there. But what about our spiritual lives, right? What about our spiritual lives? Does that motto of being prepared, does it, and I guess pose the question too, should it cross over into our way of thinking when it comes to our spiritual selves? And so I think it should, but I definitely want to consider some biblical perspective because that's what actually matters. Now, I know we're in David and Goliath, but first I want to jump to First Peter. And so I want to talk about, again, as I already mentioned earlier, I want to talk about being prepared, but I want to talk about the why behind it. So we talked about kind of how this happened. We talked about David's anointing and how God prepared him for what was going to happen through that. We talked about also how David did some work on his own, not that it was about him or anything like that, but that he did some work on his own that helped him prepare for what was going to happen as well. But I want to talk about today the importance of preparation. And there's really two passages that came to mind to me that probably would solidify the entire message. And probably I say the most important, but they're both very important. But this one I think stands out to us, and you probably know it. 1 Peter 5:8, it says, to be sober-minded, to be watchful. Your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour. So this word in the Greek, as far as being watchful, it is grey gorao. And the reason I'm mentioning that is because I think it's important to note that when they would say this word, oftentimes, I'm not going to say exclusively because that's not the case, but oftentimes it was a warning. It was to get their attention. Hey, watch out, right? There's something coming. There's something there. Most of you guys know we were at the beach last week. It was, I think it was a fantastic time. You guys that know me well know that I don't necessarily love the beach because the hotness, the sand, people, those kinds of things. But anyways, it was a great time. But one of the days, like we were getting ready to go down to the beach, and we noticed that there was, let's say, a lot of activity on the beach. It was different, caught our attention. So we were looking out there, and there were lifeguards everywhere. They were on four-wheelers. They were on those little like side-by-sides. They were blowing their whistles. They were getting everyone out of the water. And it was really interesting. This was the first time we had encountered this, seen in the movies, of course. But there was a shark in the water that was close enough that they were concerned about, and it was actively feeding. So I guess that makes up for a bad combination when people are in the water. So these lifeguards were running around, literally driving up and down the beach, blowing their whistles. They were saying, "Hey, there's a shark in the water. Get out!" Right? And what was really cool, I guess, to see was like nobody was like, "No, there's not." Like they moved fast. It was incredible to see how quickly some of those people ran, swam, did everything they could, grabbed their kids, ran for their lives, all that kind of stuff. Like because the warning was given, right? Hey, watch out! There's a shark. And so, in the same context as the way this word is used, hey, watch out. But this time, they're not talking about a shark, they're talking about a lion. And that lion's out there and he wants to eat you, he wants to destroy you, he wants to consume you. In fact, that's his job, that's his plan, is to see whom he can devour. And so here we see Peter saying, hey, pay attention. Like I might have been talking a lot, and like I do often, and maybe with your kids you can reference this, but hey, pay attention. There's something important here, right? What we've been doing and what we've been talking about, yes, it matters, but pay attention here. Wake up, right? Wake up. There's something you need to pay attention to. And so in this particular case, we and all of us, I guess, we went back in the water eventually at the beach. But I can assure you this, I and the kids for sure were much more vigilant of what was around us when like seaweed would touch us, which we would assume was seaweed. Like we were much more aware of that. Was that seaweed? Was it something else? Right? Because we had been warned, we've been told about what's there, we had been almost made aware of the danger that's around us. And because of that, right, we were kind of prepared to have to move. Like I'm a big guy, but if somebody says shark, I'm moving fast, right? And so it's that same concept because we've been prepared, really. We've been kind of told about it. We've been fair warning that there could be a shark, so we were ready. And again, in our spiritual lives, there is a real enemy. And I think this is what's so unfortunate many times is that in these settings, like in a church setting or in a Christian conversation, we tend to talk about things like evil and everything, but we kind of it's more ethereal. It's not real to us sometimes, and that's really unfortunate because there is a real enemy, right? This is not necessarily a figure of speech. This is not necessarily something that the boogeyman kind of concept. This is real. Right? This is real. We have a real enemy, and we've been warned over and over that that real enemy is wanting to devour us, to destroy us, and not just us, but those that are around us, our families. Right? We talk about our kids, we talk about our spouse, we talk about in some cases, even our parents, and just like the enemy's job is to destroy us. We know in John chapter 10:10, Jesus said that the reason, right, that the enemy is there is to steal, kill, and destroy. Like that's his plan, that's his motive, that's what he does, and unfortunately, that is what he's good at. And again, in 1 Peter 5:8, it's talking about how this lion is out there roaming around and he's looking for someone to devour. When that concept comes into my mind, and I began to think about that, I began to think about not as you're all together in one pack. It's more that one individual is kind of off by themselves, right? Much easier to pick off, if you will, from the rest of the crowd, right? And so when we, excuse me, when we aren't prepared, when we begin to grow complacent in our lives, when we begin to kind of walk through the ordinary life that we live, sometimes we get so complacent that we've been warned, we know there's an enemy, but then sometimes we just kind of ignore it. But the reality is that we should be aware. I think what's important too is Peter did not say, be afraid, right? He didn't say, stay inside or anything like that. He just said, be watchful, pay attention. There's an enemy that's out here. And so, again, like this kind of gives us direction in our life. We're supposed to continue to live our lives. We're not supposed to try to live underneath a rock, or we're not supposed to try to live in some kind of solitude or anything, but we're supposed to live our lives. But we need to be mindful. We need to be watchful that there is a real enemy, that we need to be prepared for whatever situations come our way. Another example, I told you there were two that came to my mind, was Jesus. He was speaking about his return, and this is in Matthew chapter 24, verses 43 and 44. So Matthew 24, 43 through 44. This is Jesus speaking. He says, but know this, that if the master of the house had known in what part of the night that the thief was coming, he would have stayed awake and would not have let his house be broken into. Verse 44 says, therefore, you also must be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour you do not expect. Right? I love this analogy because I think we can all relate to it. If you guys have ever had your home broken into, a vehicle broken into, or something stolen literally out of your hand. I remember April was with the girls when they were really young at a mall. Her phone was stolen from her hand. I remember my vehicle was broken into when I was in high school going into college. I remember another vehicle that was broken into. I remember our garage was broken into. We had a house that was like unfortunate, I guess, is what it was. But the reality is that like when that happens, right? You feel violated. You feel, I don't know, a lot anger. There's a lot of things going on there. But if I'd have known, right? If I had known that some outstanding individual of our town was going to break into my garage, like I would have been ready for it. Like in my mind, I'm thinking Kevin McAllister kind of stuff, right? Anybody get that reference? I'm glad some of you do. So like that's what I'm thinking. Like if I would have known tonight's the night that it's going to happen, there would have been traps, there would have been BB guns, there would have been fire if we had that opportunity, tar, paint cans, bowling balls, bricks, everything that I could potentially think of to try to kind of for that plan that they had. And this is what's being said here, right? If we would have known when the enemy was coming, if we would have